Between 1983 and 1997, a vast expanse of American wilderness became a graveyard. The Great Basin, stretching across Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and Idaho, had always been a place where interstate highways cut through endless miles of desert and mountains, where truck stops served as lonely beacons in the darkness, and where travelers could disappear without a trace. But during those 14 years, this remote landscape transformed into something far more sinister. At least 9 women, most of them young and vulnerable, were sexually assaulted, murdered, and dumped like discarded cargo along the highways that crossed this desolate terrain. What made these crimes particularly terrifying wasn't just their brutality, but the methodical way victims were posed after death, arranged in grotesque displays that seemed designed to shock whoever discovered them. Bodies were left on hilltops, in snowdrifts, floating in rivers, and scattered across desert expanses, all connected by the interstate highway system that became both hunting ground and disposal route for killers who understood how to make people vanish. Tonight, we dive into the Great Basin Murders, a series of crimes that initially seemed to be the work of a single serial killer, but revealed something even more disturbing: multiple predators using the same vast wilderness to hide their darkest impulses. The Great Basin is one of America's most isolated and unforgiving landscapes, a high desert region covering over 200,000 square miles where small towns are separated by hundreds of miles of empty highway. During the 1980s and 1990s, this area was primarily crossed by long-haul truckers, hitchhikers, and travelers moving between major population centers on the West Coast and the interior of the country. The interstate highway system that cut through the region, including I-80, I-70, and I-15, created perfect corridors for both legitimate travel and criminal activity. For predators, the Great Basin offered advantages that would have been impossible to find in more populated areas. The vast distances between towns meant that victims could be transported far from where they were abducted, making it difficult for law enforcement agencies to coordinate investigations. The harsh desert environment accelerated decomposition, destroying evidence and making it harder to determine exact causes of death. Most importantly, the transient nature of highway travel meant that both perpetrators and victims could be from anywhere in the country, creating jurisdictional nightmares that allowed cases to go cold while agencies struggled to share information. The victims of the Great Basin Murders shared certain tragic characteristics that made them particularly vulnerable to highway predators. Many were young women traveling alone, either by choice or circumstance. Some were sex workers who frequented truck stops, while others were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Several were hitchhiking, a common practice during the era that exposed travelers to enormous risks. What united them all was their presence along the highway corridors that became hunting grounds for killers who understood how to exploit the isolation and anonymity of long-distance travel. The first recognized victim was Janelle Johnson, a 23-year-old who was hitchhiking from Denver to Riverton, Wyoming, in February 1983. She was last seen at a truck stop in Sinclair, Wyoming at 9 p.m. on February 17th, and her body was found 2 weeks later in a shallow grave that had been partially eroded by storm drains. Johnson had been raped and murdered, with bite marks on her shoulder providing evidence of the savage nature of her attack. Unfortunately, the physical evidence from her case, including DNA samples, was lost when a refrigerator storing the materials broke down, eliminating crucial clues that might have solved her murder decades earlier. The Great Basin Murders gained national attention with the 1988 disappearance of Lisa Marie Kimmell, an 18-year-old from Billings, Montana, whose case would eventually break open part of the mystery. Lisa was driving her distinctive black Honda CRX with Lil Miss vanity plates from Denver to Billings on March 25, 1988, when she vanished somewhere along the desolate highways of Wyoming. 8 days later, fishermen found her body in the North Platte River near Casper, bearing evidence of brutal sexual assault, beating, and multiple stab wounds. The forensic examination revealed ligature marks on her wrists and ankles, indicating she had been held captive for days before her murder. What made Lisa's case particularly disturbing was the psychological element that emerged after her burial. Someone left a note on her grave signed Stringfellow Hawke, the name of a fictional character from the 1980s television series Airwolf. This bizarre detail suggested that her killer was not only comfortable enough to visit the burial site, but was playing games with investigators and the victim's family. The note indicated a level of confidence and callousness that transformed the case from a random highway murder into something far more calculated and disturbing. The murders continued throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, each case adding new horrors to the growing pattern. Vicki Lynn Perkins, a 19-year-old described by law enforcement as a prostitute who worked truck stops, disappeared from Portland in March 1989. Her skeletal remains were discovered months later in Utah, far from where she was last seen alive. The case of Bitter Creek Betty, an unidentified woman found in Wyoming in 1992, revealed the extreme violence these killers were capable of. She had been brutally beaten, raped, and strangled before being killed with an ice pick to the head, and evidence suggested she had fought fiercely against her attacker, likely wounding him in the process. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these crimes was how the bodies were discovered. Many victims were found posed in specific positions, with some arranged to resemble crosses or other symbolic shapes. The Shafter Jane Doe, found near an Interstate 80 exit in Nevada in 1993, had been positioned on her back with arms and legs spread to form a cross-like shape. She had been shot twice in the chest and showed evidence of being transported to the dump site in a medium or large vehicle, possibly a pickup truck or van. The calculated nature of these displays suggested killers who took pleasure not just in the murders themselves, but in the shock and horror their discoveries would create. The breakthrough in understanding the Great Basin murders began in 2002, when DNA evidence linked Dale Wayne Eaton, a 57-year-old career criminal from Wyoming, to Lisa Kimmell's murder. Eaton's violent history stretched back decades, including a troubling family background marked by mental illness and abuse. When investigators searched his property in Moneta, Wyoming, they made a shocking discovery. Lisa's Honda CRX, buried 8 feet underground with its wheels, seats, and stereo system removed and incorporated into Eaton's own vehicles. The revelation that multiple killers were responsible for the Great Basin murders came gradually as DNA technology advanced and allowed investigators to link different crimes to different perpetrators. Robert Ben Rhoades, a long-haul trucker with a specially modified cargo trailer that functioned as a mobile torture chamber, was eventually linked to the murders of married couple Patricia Walsh and Douglas Scott Ziskowski. Clark Perry Baldwin, another trucker, was connected through DNA to the murders of Bitter Creek Betty and other unidentified victims. The realization that several predators had been operating simultaneously in the same region was both disturbing and enlightening, explaining the variations in methodology and victim selection that had puzzled investigators for years. The prevailing theory among law enforcement is that the Great Basin became a preferred hunting ground for multiple serial killers because of its unique geographical and social characteristics. The vast distances, sparse population, and heavy truck traffic created an environment where predators could operate with minimal risk of detection. The interstate highway system provided both access to victims and escape routes, while the harsh desert environment helped destroy evidence and accelerate the decomposition process that made forensic investigation more difficult. Another compelling theory focuses on the psychological profile of highway killers and how the Great Basin environment appealed to their specific pathologies. These predators were often long-haul truckers or other travelers who spent most of their time isolated on the road, developing fantasies and compulsions that could only be satisfied through violence. The anonymity of highway travel meant they could maintain normal facades in their home communities while indulging their darkest impulses hundreds of miles away. The Great Basin's reputation for swallowing travelers without a trace may have actually attracted killers who understood they could operate with impunity in such an environment. Some investigators believe that the posed nature of many crime scenes indicates killers who were not just seeking sexual gratification, but were making statements or following ritualistic compulsions. The cross-like positioning of bodies, The specific dump sites chosen for maximum impact and the games played with investigators suggest perpetrators who viewed their crimes as performances or messages. This theory implies that the Great Basin killers were more sophisticated and psychologically complex than typical opportunistic murderers, planning their crimes with theatrical elements designed to maximize psychological impact. The most disturbing theory is that the 9 confirmed Great Basin victims represent only a fraction of the actual murders committed in the region during this period. The successful concealment of evidence in the harsh desert environment, combined with the transient nature of the victim population, means that many disappearances may never have been reported or connected to the series. Some investigators believe that the true number of victims could be in the dozens, with bodies still undiscovered in the vast wilderness areas that surround the interstate corridors where these killers operated. Today, the Great Basin continues to be crossed by thousands of travelers daily, but the memory of those 14 years of terror lingers like a shadow over the endless highways. While several of the perpetrators have been caught and convicted, the knowledge that multiple killers were simultaneously using this vast landscape as their hunting ground raises disturbing questions about how many other predators may have operated in the region without ever being detected. The harsh beauty of the desert highways now carries the weight of unsolved murders and unidentified victims who may never receive justice. The Great Basin Murders fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches serial crimes that cross multiple jurisdictions. The development of highway killer task forces, improved DNA databases, and better communication between agencies can all be traced back to the failures and successes of investigating these crimes. The cases demonstrated how modern killers could exploit the anonymity and mobility of American highway culture, turning the freedom of the open road into opportunities for predation and murder. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Great Basin Murders is the realization that some of the perpetrators may still be at large. While Dale Wayne Eaton, Robert Ben Rhoades, and Clark Perry Baldwin have been convicted for their roles in the series, several murders remain unsolved, and the vast wilderness of the Great Basin likely still holds secrets that may never be revealed. The unidentified victims, known only by nicknames like Bitter Creek Betty and Shafter Jane Doe, serve as reminders that evil found perfect concealment in one of America's most isolated landscapes. As you drive through the Great Basin today, past the same truck stops where victims were last seen alive, and the same desolate exits where bodies were dumped, remember that this beautiful, unforgiving landscape became a graveyard because predators understood how to exploit its isolation. The highways that connect our communities also provided corridors for killers who turned the American dream of freedom and mobility into a nightmare that claimed at least 9 lives and may have claimed many more.